The rain tapped against my apartment window like impatient fingers, falling into rhythm with the soft, restless clicking of my own fingertips against my phone screen. The tiny one-bedroom place I had called a refuge for more than a year suddenly felt suffocating, as though the walls were quietly inching inward. The faint scent of instant coffee still lingered in the air, mixing with the damp smell rising from the hand-washed clothes I had hung to dry that morning. Beyond the window pane trembling in the wind, the Chicago skyline glimmered under the rain, its lights stretched into long, blurred streaks against the cold night. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," I whispered, my voice so small it couldn't even overpower the hiss of the wind outside. The message still glowed on my screen, sent more than 20 minutes ago to a number I should never have saved. The moment my thumb hit send, regret crashed over me like a real wave, knocking the breath from inside my chest. The message was only a single line. "Do you remember that dinner? Next time let me cook. Claire." A joke. A foolish, reckless joke born from 2 glasses of cheap wine and the provocative encouragement of Riley, my best friend, who believed I needed to crawl out of my shell after the disaster named Jake. We had rummaged through my phone contacts, and Riley was the one who found that number saved under the name "Do Not Contact," a warning I had written for myself. "He won't ever see it," Riley had insisted, laughing as she snatched the phone from me once I finished typing. Men like him always have someone screening their messages, and he probably forgot that little waitress anyway. But I had never forgotten him. How could I? Daniel Russo was not the kind of man anyone easily forgot. I met him only once, at an extravagant fundraising gala at the Art Institute of Chicago, where I picked up an extra server shift just to make rent. He didn't speak much, barely spoke at all, actually. But simply by being present, he made an entire room fall silent. His deep black eyes missed nothing. His tailored suit likely cost more than my yearly income. A mere nod from him could make men twice my size step back and obey. Everyone knew who he was, though no one dared say his name out loud. Whispers always followed him. Daniel Russo, the youngest head of the Russo family. Dangerous, cold, untouchable. And now, I had just sent him a flirtatious message, a thoughtless joke, a joke that could ruin my life. I paced across the worn carpet of my living room. 21 minutes passed. I had already called Riley 3 times, but she didn't answer. She was probably drunk somewhere, already at another bar after dropping me off. I was alone with my own mistake. The soft vibration of my phone made me jump. My heart pounded so hard it caught in my throat. Unknown number. I stared at the screen, frozen, until the call ended. 3 seconds later it rang again. With trembling fingers, I swiped to answer. "Hello?" Silence. Only the sound of rain and breathing. "Hello?" I repeated, my voice a little steadier. "Open the door, Claire." That voice froze the blood in my veins. Low, calm, edged with something I couldn't name. I had heard it only once, when he thanked me for the whiskey, but I recognized it instantly. "Mr. Russo?" I stammered. "I'm sorry about the message, my friend. I'm standing at your door. Open it." The call ended. I stood there, unable to breathe. How did he know where I lived? Why was he here? I lived in an overlooked building in Logan Square, the kind of place where tenants valued quiet and never asked questions. I thought I had chosen the perfect place to disappear. Then my legs moved on instinct. I walked toward the door, my palms slick with sweat, my heartbeat thrashing against my ribs. I leaned toward the peephole. He was there, alone. That surprised me. In my mind, someone like Daniel Russo never went anywhere without bodyguards. His black coat was dotted with rain, his dark hair slightly damp. He wasn't looking at the door but down at his phone. The screen's glow traced the sharp planes of his face. As though sensing my gaze, he lifted his head. Those eyes black, deep, cold, cut straight through the peephole, straight through the door, straight through me. I could pretend I wasn't home. I could call the police. I unlatched the door. I unlocked it. I opened it, because I knew delaying wouldn't change what was about to happen. If you've listened this far and feel this story touches something inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we have the strength to bring you more emotional stories every day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. Let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We cherish every word you share. Daniel said nothing when I opened the door. He simply stepped inside as though the space already belonged to him. I had to back up to avoid brushing against him, and the door clicked shut behind him with a sound so soft and yet so chilling. Not loud, not threatening, but undeniably heavy. The scent of rain soaked into his expensive coat blended with the faint trace of cologne and the cold metallic smell of the night, thickening the air in my tiny apartment. He scanned the room as if mapping a battlefield. Nothing escaped him. The pile of unsorted books, the half-finished glass of wine on the table, the old photograph of my parents on the mantel. His gaze lingered just a second on each long enough to memorize it all. "You shouldn't open the door without knowing who's outside," he said, his voice low and quiet as breath, making my hands instinctively fold over my chest. "Especially in this neighborhood," I swallowed. I looked first. I knew it was you. A flicker of something amusement maybe crossed his eyes. "And you still opened the door. Interesting." He shrugged off his coat and hung it neatly on the hook, as if he had done it here 100 times. Beneath it, he wore a charcoal suit, perfectly fitted, with a silver watch peeking from beneath the cuff. He ran a hand through his hair, droplets still sliding down his temple. "Sit," he said, nodding toward my old sofa. I stayed where I was, arms crossed, suddenly aware I was wearing an old Northwestern t-shirt and faded sleep shorts. Heat rose to my face, but I didn't move. "I don't want to." His eyes darkened. "Claire." He said my name, in that deep, cutting voice, each syllable slicing through the space between us. "Sit. Please." The word please sounded optional, not earnest. Yet I still obeyed, my legs carrying me to the sofa against my own logic. I perched on the edge, spine rigid. He chose the chair opposite me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on me. "That message," he said after a long, oppressive silence. "Explain." I swallowed hard. "It was just a stupid joke. Riley and we were drinking. She dared me. I didn't think you'd see it, or remember me." "I remember everyone," he said, unblinking, "especially the ones who make me pay attention." His words thudded against my chest. "I'm truly sorry. I meant nothing by it. It was meaningless." He was silent for a moment. "What interests me," he finally said, "is how you even have my number." My eyes widened. You gave it to me. That night. At the gala. You said I could contact you if I needed anything." He nodded slowly, as though confirming something. "And what do you need from me now, Claire?" He spoke my name like he owned it, as though no one else had the right. A cold rush slid down my spine. "I don't need anything. I told you it was a joke. Yet here we are." He glanced around my tiny space. "Do you live alone?" The question tightened every muscle in my body. "That's none of your business." In an instant, the air shifted. He stood, moving so quickly I flinched. One hand braced on the back of the sofa behind me. The other lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "From the moment you hit send on that message, everything about you became my business," he said, his voice rough like sharpened steel. "Do you have any idea what could have happened if someone else saw it? If they traced the number? Found you?" I couldn't breathe. I don't understand." "No," he murmured almost gently. "You don't." He released me and stepped back, pulling his phone from his inner pocket. He tapped a few times, then held the screen toward me. My heart stopped. On the screen was a photo of Riley and me leaving my building earlier tonight. We were laughing, unaware of anyone watching. "My people have been keeping an eye on you since the gala," he said, slipping the Pepetis phone away. "Standard procedure for anyone I give my personal number to. When your message came through, I was in a meeting a few blocks away. I came myself because I needed to understand why." I stared at him, stunned. You were watching me?" "No, I was protecting you," he corrected, in a tone that allowed no doubt. "Though clearly my people have been too discreet if you felt comfortable enough to use my information as a joke." "I don't need anyone protecting me," I said, though my voice shook. "And I don't need anything from you." His mouth curved into a half-smile, cold as ice. "It isn't that simple anymore, Claire." I couldn't remember when I had gotten to my feet. I only knew that my heart was beating wildly against my ribs as Daniel remained where he was, watching me as if I were a puzzle he intended to solve, His eyes never left me, not for a single second, making me feel as though every movement, every breath, was being measured and weighed. I stepped back once, the distance between us still small but enough to let me breathe again. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. "Why have someone follow me? I'm just a stranger." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his damp coat, shook off the rain, and placed it back on the hook. His calm, ordinary gesture clashed violently with the storm spiraling inside my head. "You're not a stranger," he finally said. "Not to me." I looked at him, searching for some sign that he was joking, that this was one of those strange games played by men with too much power and too little joy. But there was nothing like that. Only a cold, unwavering seriousness in his voice. "You don't even know who I am. Claire Morgan, 27 years old, raised in Naperville, graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in literature, currently working part-time at the public library and at the Hollow Oak Bar. Your mother died of cancer. When you were 18, your father left when you were 10. You have no close relatives nearby, only Riley Monroe, your closest friend. You like old mystery novels, collect Polaroid photos, and you hate dark chocolate." Each sentence he spoke struck like a hammer, shattering the fragile peace I had built around my life. My throat tightened. "You investigated me?" I observed. He corrected softly. "After the gala, I had people look into you." "Why?" He was silent for a moment, then spoke in a low, rough voice pulled from somewhere deep in his chest. "Because that night, you were the only one in the entire room who wasn't afraid of me." The words stopped me cold. I had never thought of myself as brave. I only remembered that night. While the other servers avoided his eyes, I handed him the glass of whiskey with both hands, meeting his gaze without bowing my head. Not because I wanted to prove anything, I simply didn't know what I was supposed to fear when I didn't understand it yet. "I wasn't afraid then," I whispered. "But now I am." He didn't deny it. "Good. Fear is instinct. It keeps you alive." I turned away, trying to quiet the surge of thoughts twisting inside me. How had everything changed so quickly? One message, one joke, and now I was standing here, face to face with a man I should have forgotten long ago. A man I had never truly known, yet could never stop imagining. Daniel Russo wasn't just a name whispered in rumors or printed in the news. He was standing in my living room, solid and real, carrying with him a world I had no desire to be part of. "What do you want from me?" I asked, forcing myself to meet his eyes again. He looked at me as though he were asking himself the same question. "I'm trying to understand that," he said, his voice lowering as if confessing something difficult. "But what I do know is, you've stepped into a story you can't walk away from anymore." I wrapped my 40 arms around myself, my eyes never leaving his. "I never wanted to be part of your world. But you already are," he said, his voice light as a verdict. "And that puts you in danger." I shook my head. "I'm not connected to anyone. I don't know anything. Some people don't care. If they believe you know something, that alone makes you a target." I closed my eyes for a moment, fighting the rising panic. I couldn't let myself fall apart, not in front of him. When I opened them again, Daniel was looking at me with an expression no longer cold but almost regretful. "I should have forgotten you long ago," I said. "I never should have kept that number." He nodded slightly, his eyes still fixed on me. "Perhaps, but you didn't. And now, it's already begun, Claire." I didn't know why I obeyed him, but when Daniel told me I needed to leave the apartment immediately, I didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush me, he simply looked at me with eyes that made refusal impossible. I quietly slipped my phone, wallet, and a thin coat into my bag, then stood beside the door, watching him. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice as small as the rain tapping on the windows. "Somewhere safer," he answered, opening the door without looking back. The rain hadn't stopped. It was colder now, heavier. I pulled my coat tight and followed close behind him. Under the dim streetlights, the black SUV waiting at the curb looked like a ghost taking shape in the darkness. A tall man in a long coat stood beside it, holding the rear door open. He glanced at me but said nothing. Daniel nodded, and I climbed into the car in silence. The scent of new leather and rain filled the enclosed space. The engine hummed softly, and the SUV pulled away from the curb as if it had never stopped there. Through the window, I watched my apartment shrink behind a curtain of rain, then fade entirely. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand we turn back, to cling to the small, predictable world I had believed belonged to me, but I couldn't. The air around me felt charged, dangerous, as though I were seated at the thin edge of something vast, dark, and uncontrollable. "Where are you taking me?" I asked again, trying to keep my voice steady. "Out of sight from the people watching you," Daniel said, his eyes fixed ahead. "Who are they?" "People who don't hesitate to hurt anyone standing between them and what they want." "And what do they want from me?" His silence stretched, heavy and cold, an answer more frightening than words. "I don't know," he said at last, "but they believe you have something you shouldn't have." I turned toward him. "I don't even understand what I've been dragged into. I have nothing to do with you. I'm not involved with anyone." "Exactly," he said quietly. "That's why you're the perfect target. No one pays attention to you. No one thinks you matter. They believe you could disappear without leaving a trace." His words chilled me to the bone. I looked out the window again, watching the city lights thin into darkness. We were leaving the familiar neighborhoods behind, driving into the quiet outskirts lined with sparse trees and pale street lamps. "Can I call Riley?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I need her to know I'm okay." Daniel turned to me, and for the first time, his gaze softened. "Call her if you want, but don't tell her where you are." I nodded, pulling out my phone. Riley answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with panic. "Claire? God, where are you? I've texted you 12 times. "I'm okay," I said quickly, trying to sound composed. I needed to get out of the city for a bit. Something happened. I'll explain later. But I'm safe." "What are you talking about? Is someone with you?" I looked at Daniel. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. "No, I just need time to think. I'll call you when I can. Please don't worry." I hung up before she could press further. Guilt rose in me like a tide, the sickening feeling of abandoning the one person I truly trusted. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes as if weighing something heavy. I noticed his hand resting on his thigh, the tendons tense beneath his skin. Outside, the rain slowed, the wipers brushing rhythmically like a countdown to something still approaching. I turned toward him, finding my voice. "What are you going to do with me?" He opened his eyes, and the darkness in them reflected the blurred streetlights. "I'm going to keep you safe, Claire. Believe it or not, that's the only thing I'm certain of right now." The drive stretched on for more than an hour, through empty roads and sleeping towns tucked beneath the thick veil of rain. As the city faded behind us, I felt myself slipping out of reality, as though I had stepped through an invisible door into a different world, one where familiar rules no longer applied. Daniel didn't speak again, and I didn't break the silence. I needed the quiet to breathe, to stitch together the scattered pieces of memory, to understand how a foolish message had thrust me into this spiraling danger. When the SUV finally stopped, it was in front of a 2-story wooden house, hidden among tall pines beside a still, dark lake that mirrored the night sky. The house wasn't grand, but it had an air of solidity and secrecy, as though it had been built to exist without being found. Daniel stepped out before I could ask anything, motioning for me to follow. My sneakers sank into the damp earth, quickly soaking through. The air smelled of pine bark and wild grass, crisp and clean in a way Chicago never was. He unlocked the door with an old metal key, not a security system, not a keypad, just a simple traditional lock. I followed him inside. The house was quiet and warm, with a stone fireplace glowing, gently, casting soft amber light across the wooden floor. Nothing lavish, just a few chairs, a bookshelf, a thin rug, and a porcelain tea set sitting neatly on the table. "This place has belonged to my family for years," Daniel said, removing his coat and hanging it up. "No one but me knows you're here." I stood still, not taking off my coat, feeling like a misplaced object in a space that was never meant for me. "Why bring me here?" He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. "Because I need you safe while we talk, and you need to understand a few truths." I accepted the glass, my fingers so cold I needed both hands to hold it. Daniel sat across from me, studying me for a long moment before speaking. "There's a reason you were being followed, not just because of the message you sent, but because the night you worked that gala, something happened you didn't realize." I frowned. What do you mean? A storage device, a USB drive, went missing that night. It contains critical information on underground networks, bank accounts, transaction histories, contact lists. Something that could burn an entire organization to ashes if it fell into the wrong hands. I don't know anything about a USB, I said. No, you don't. But you accidentally picked it up. My breath caught. That's impossible. You were spilled on, remember? Someone dropped champagne on your dress. You were taken to the staff lounge where they kept their bags and coats. While you were drying off, you picked something up from under the sofa and slipped it into your bag without realizing it. I searched my memory desperately. Yes, I had been soaked. Yes, I'd sat in a small room with a handheld dryer trying to salvage my dress. Yes, I had picked up something small and black from the floor, assuming it had fallen off the dryer. I had thrown it away, or at least I thought I had, Daniel continued. My people traced the signal it gave off. Before it went dark, the last location was your home. I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't know anything, I repeated, almost pleading. I swear. I believe you, Daniel said, his voice gentler now. But others don't, and they think you still have it. They won't stop until they're certain. I set the glass down with trembling fingers, looking at him. What am I supposed to do? For now, stay here. Let me handle it. Handle it how? He looked at me for a long time before answering. I'll start by making sure you don't disappear in the night without anyone remembering the name Claire Morgan. I sat there for a long time after Daniel left the room, my mind blank, my palms ice cold. The firelight flickered against the wooden walls, throwing shifting shadows that looked almost like footsteps behind me. But no one was there, only me, the light rain over the lake, and memories slowly rising from a dark corner I hadn't realized still existed. I closed my eyes, took a long breath, and forced my thoughts back to that night, the charity gala. The gleaming lights, the soft swell of orchestral music, the mingled scents of expensive perfume, wine, and polished leather. I remembered standing at the edge of the room, holding a tray of drinks, my feet aching in cheap heels. A man brushed past me, careless, knocking a glass of wine across my dress. I remembered the cold wetness spreading through the fabric, the half-hearted apology in his eyes, and then a manager pulling me down a hallway to clean up. The small, narrow room, the dim lighting. I dug through my purse for tissues, lifted my dress slightly to wipe it off, and then the image came back with startling clarity, as though it had happened only hours ago. I saw a small black object beneath the sofa, as long as my little finger, with a sliding cap. I picked it up on instinct, thinking it was a piece that had fallen off the old handheld dryer the staff usually used. I remembered slipping it into the pocket of my coat while my hands were still full of tissues, then never thinking about it again. I hadn't thrown it away. I hadn't given it to anyone. When I got home, I had tossed the coat over the chair, and the next morning, when I did laundry, I hadn't checked the pockets. It could still have been in there. I shot upright, my heart pounding against my ribs. I remembered that coat clearly gray, thick, slightly itchy at the collar. I had dropped it off at a donation bin about a week ago. No. I stumbled toward my backpack, frantically searching for my phone. If there was any clue about where I sent that coat, it would be in the email receipt from the drop-off station. My fingers trembled as I searched through my inbox. 3 weeks ago, I had delivered the donation bag to a local collection point, and it had been transferred to a distribution center on the south side of Chicago. I stared at the name of the facility, my head spinning. The USB might still be there, or maybe not, but at least now I knew my memory hadn't lied to me. Daniel stepped into the room just as I was scribbling the center's address onto a scrap of paper. He watched me with a probing expression. What is it? I held the paper out to him. I think I know where the USB is. He crossed the room quickly, taking the note, his eyes narrowing as he read it. You're sure? I can't promise, but I remember now. I picked it up. I thought it was just a piece of plastic, and I left it in my coat and donated it. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. Very good. The first step to cleaning up a mess is knowing where you stand inside it. I looked at him, my voice dropping. What if someone else gets to that center before we do? Then we'll know. And if someone has, at least now I'm certain of one thing. What? Daniel looked at me, his eyes no longer cold, but so serious my heart seemed to sink inside my chest. That you're no longer outside this story. You're in the middle of it, and you need me. I didn't sleep the entire night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that small black USB haunted me like a ghost. The next morning, the sky was still gray, heavy clouds sagging low over the lake, making the world outside the cabin feel colder, lonelier. I sat by the window, staring at the thin ribbon of mist gliding across the water, my thoughts weighed down by questions with no answers. Daniel had gone out early, saying he needed to arrange for someone to check the distribution center where I'd sent my clothes. He left me alone in the cabin with strict instructions: don't open the door, don't use the Wi-Fi, don't answer unknown numbers. I sat by the fireplace, clutching my phone, the blank screen feeling like the world had temporarily gone silent. But then it buzzed. Once, twice, a number I didn't recognize. I didn't pick up. I stared at it until the ringing stopped, only for it to start again seconds later. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I finally answered, my voice rough. Hello? For the first few seconds, there was only breathing heavy, uneven, and then a voice came through, low and dry. If you want your friend Riley to live, come alone. I jolted upright as if struck. What? Who is this? Doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about. Call anyone, and she won't be your friend much longer. I need proof. I need to know she's alive. Silence. Then a faint, choked sound, like a muffled sob. Claire. Riley's voice. Weak, trembling. I nearly collapsed. Don't hurt her. Please, I'll come. Just tell me where. Roosevelt Park. Behind Warehouse 9. 2 hours. Come alone. The call ended. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. There was only one thought left in my mind. Riley. Taken. I tried calling Daniel, but he didn't answer. I texted him. Instead, typing without accents, terrified someone might intercept it. Riley Bibat. Chung doa giet. Mfid. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew he would forbid it. But I couldn't sit here while Riley, the one person who had always stood beside me, was being tortured because of something I had unknowingly carried. I pulled on one of Daniel's old jackets to avoid being recognized, tugged a hat low over my head, zipped the collar up, and slipped out of the cabin. I found the second car he kept in the shed out back, a beat-up sedan that drew no attention. I drove out of the woods in a daze, my mind spiraling with the worst possibilities. By the time I reached Roosevelt Park, the rain had begun again in a soft, cold drizzle. I parked several blocks from Warehouse 9 and walked the rest of the way, each step feeling like sleepwalking through a nightmare. This part of the city had been abandoned for years, cracked brick buildings, peeling paint, weeds pushing through every gap in the concrete. I approached the exact spot they'd named, my pulse thundering when I saw the metal door behind the warehouse slightly ajar. I slipped inside. The air was damp, dusty, metallic. Riley? I whispered, my voice breaking. No answer. I stepped deeper, my footsteps echoing sharply against the cold cement. Then I saw her, tied to a chair, tape over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. I rushed forward. Riley, I'm here. You're okay. But before I could touch her, footsteps echoed behind me. I turned and saw 2 men advancing. One had a long scar down his left cheek. The other held something that looked like a stun gun. I backed up on instinct, shielding Riley, but it was too late. The second man aimed the device at me and fired. Everything went black in an instant, and just before consciousness slipped away, I heard a cold voice echo from somewhere in the darkness. Now the prey has walked in by herself. The sound of a car stopping outside cut through the prey. Warehouse like a death knell, a signal that the game had reached the point of no return. The leader turned and motioned to his men. One of them yanked Riley to her feet. The other dragged my chair to the center of the room, tightened the restraints on my wrists until fire licked up my arms, then fixed my ankles to the floor with another set of ties. The leader leaned in close, his breath cold against my ear, his voice a rusted blade tracing down my spine. Sit still, keep your eyes open. Watch how he reacts when he sees you're the bait. He stepped back just as the rear door burst open. Daniel stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, his coat plastered to his shoulders. His gaze darkened instantly, taking in the ropes around my wrists. Riley trembling in the corner, and the 3 men circling like hyenas around a carcass. He didn't say a word. He simply walked in, slow and deliberate. Each step controlled a predator moving through enemy territory. The leader lifted his hand in a gesture halfway between greeting and mockery. "Russo." Finally, Daniel stopped. His eyes flicked to me, then locked on the man in front of him. "I'm here. Now let them go." The man chuckled and pulled a USB from his pocket, holding it up like a trophy. "Your presence was the first condition, but we both know you didn't come here just to negotiate." Daniel didn't flinch. His voice dropped to a low, precise growl. "If you touch a single hair on their heads, I'll make sure you don't have enough bones left to bury." The entire room froze. For a split second, just one heartbeat, I saw something shift in the leader's face. Something close to uncertainty. Then he nodded. Every man in the room drew a gun. Daniel slowly lifted his hands, then lowered himself to his knees in the center of the floor. "I didn't bring anyone. I didn't bring weapons. Now let them go." The man burst into a laugh. "You think it's that simple? I want what's inside the girl's head, and I want you to watch how I carve it out." I screamed. "No, please. I don't know anything." Daniel turned toward me, and the look in his eyes was enough to silence the room, a look that could burn everything to ashes. "No one is touching you." When the leader motioned for the gunman to move toward me, everything happened at once. Daniel twisted, grabbed a metal rod from under a nearby table, and hurled it straight into the chest of the man standing closest to me. Blood splattered across the ceiling. In the chaos, Riley slammed her head backward into the face of the man holding her, knocking both of them to the ground. I was dragged off my chair but managed to roll out of reach. Gunshots erupted. Sparks lit the darkness. A cacophony of shouts, footsteps, and ragged breathing filled the air. Daniel lunged toward me, slicing through the ties with a knife he'd ripped from someone's belt. He grabbed my hand, hauling me up. His voice was a single word, sharp, absolute. "Run." I looked around. Riley was already fighting her way free of the last restraint, blood trickling down her forehead, but she still nodded, signaling she was okay. We bolted through the back door into the cold rain, our feet skidding on the slick concrete. Daniel shoved us into an SUV waiting outside, the engine running, headlights glowing through the storm. "Keep your heads down," he ordered. I ducked just as a bullet shattered the rear window, slamming into the doorframe. Daniel jumped into the driver's seat and floored the gas. The SUV fishtailed before gripping the road and surging forward, leaving behind a chorus of angry shouts and the distant wail of sirens. 10 minutes later, after crossing out of the industrial district and turning onto a narrow dirt road leading into the woods, Daniel finally stopped and let out a rough breath. Riley and I clung to each other, both shaking uncontrollably. Daniel looked at us through the rearview mirror. "We can't go back to the city. They'll find you." My voice cracked. "Then where?" "Cabin in the woods," he said. "Off-grid. No one will track us there." Riley glanced at me, her expression asking a question she didn't dare say aloud. "Are you sure? Are you really willing to disappear into this?" But I already knew my answer. The past I never knew I carried was pulling me under like a cold, hidden current. And Daniel, dangerous, relentless, terrifyingly steady, was the only thing I had left to hold on to. That cabin wasn't a refuge. It was the beginning, the doorway to a truth I had never been prepared to face. The cabin sat deep within the forest, hidden among towering pines and a curtain of thick fog like a silent ghost watching from the tree line. Daniel drove along a narrow path full of potholes, the trees on both sides sliding past us like shadowy figures whispering things I wasn't ready to hear. When the SUV finally stopped in front of the porch, Riley and I could barely feel our arms or legs cold, exhausted, and frayed at every edge. Daniel didn't speak. He simply opened the door and reached out to help me down as if we hadn't just escaped a nightmare that nearly stole our lives. The cabin was smaller than I had imagined, a single story, its slanted wooden roof weighed down by moisture, its windows covered by thick, dark curtains. Inside, the smell of damp timber and old ash wrapped around me like a heavy, invisible blanket, comforting and suffocating all at once. Riley collapsed onto the sofa, her head resting against the armrest, eyes closed but far from asleep. I was still trembling when Daniel placed a dry towel over my shoulders and quietly coaxed the fireplace to life. The flames rose slowly, fragile at first, then stronger, casting a pool of warm light into a room surrounded by waiting shadows. I sat a short distance from him, knees pulled to my chest, staring into Ration, the fire as if its restless glow could give shape to the questions I didn't even know how to ask. Daniel didn't look at me. He sat still, eyes fixed on the flames, hands resting on his knees, the knuckles sharp and white like he was holding something in place, something that could break if he loosened his grip. "What am I to you, Daniel?" The words slipped from me, not really a question, more like a sigh that found its way into sound. He stayed silent for a long time before finally speaking, his voice rough, like it had been dragged through cold ashes. "You're the last person I ever thought would get pulled into this. But you're also the only one who made me look back." I stared at him, feeling my chest tighten. "How long have you known about my father?" Daniel turned toward me, and there was no coldness left in his eyes, only a sadness so deep it felt like it had a gravity of its own. I knew his name, knew he worked with the organization, but I didn't know he had a daughter. Not until I saw you that night at the gala. There was something in your eyes, and I had to know more. And when I learned who your father was, I couldn't leave you alone. My pulse stuttered. "So from the beginning, you were watching me, weren't you?" "Not exactly," he said quietly. "At first I thought you were a threat, but then I realized you were just a girl living a small, scraped-together life, trying to survive, with no idea you were on the map of people far more dangerous than you knew." I let out a faint, bitter laugh. "And you pitied me?" "No." His voice cut through the space between us. "I saw myself in you, the way you move through the world alone. The way you look at people like you're always bracing for the moment they leave. I lived that way my whole life. Until I met you." The room went still. The fire crackled softly, like our hearts were beating in the same uneven rhythm. Riley shifted on the sofa, breathing shallow but steady, the danger held at bay for now. I looked at Daniel for a long time before asking the question that frightened me more than anything. "If I weren't his daughter, if I were just a stranger, would you still have saved me?" Daniel stood, walked toward me, and crouched until his eyes were level with mine, leaving no distance for either of us to hide. "Yes," he said. "No hesitation. I would save you, no matter who you were." My throat tightened, the tears gathering before I even registered the feeling. Daniel reached up and brushed his fingers against my cheek so gently it felt like he was afraid I would disappear beneath his touch. Then he pulled his hand back as if he knew crossing that line would change everything. When I looked up again, I didn't see the ruthless, unshakable man people whispered about in back alleys and darkened bars. I saw someone who carried the same loneliness I did, someone whose heart had been abandoned too. And now here we were, in the heart of a forest, inside a fragile wooden cabin with a broken past behind us and a murky future ahead. The only place left to call safe was the one where my guard no longer held. The fire kept crackling in the hearth, its amber glow dancing across the dark wood walls, and Daniel's face as he sat across from me, his gaze no longer guarded and no longer hiding. Riley had drifted into sleep, curled beneath a thin blanket on the corner of the sofa, her breath steady, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. I sat cross-legged on the worn rug, cupping the hot tea Daniel had made, my fingers still trembling from cold, and the quiet fear pulsing beneath my ribs. In the flickering light, I whispered, barely above the sound of the flames, "Daniel, if you knew who I was from the beginning, why did you still choose to protect me?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his voice low and certain like the crack of wood splitting in the fire. "Because I don't believe people should be defined by the past they inherited." I didn't respond. I watched the fire lick the edges of the logs as if it could burn away all the questions tangled inside my mind. His voice softened as he continued, but his gaze felt like it was peeling back every layer of my defenses. "I've done things wrong. More than you know. I've let innocent people die. I've betrayed people I should have protected. I've turned a blind eye to things I should have stopped just to stay alive in a world that crushes anyone who hesitates. I can't undo any of it. But if there's one thing I can do right, it's making sure you don't fall into that same darkness." I lifted my head to look at him. "Then why don't you walk away? Leave all of this behind?" He smiled, a tired, worn-out smile that told me he'd asked himself that question thousands of times. "Because I'm part of it. And when you belong to the dark, you don't just step into the light and pretend you never saw what was hiding there. But you, Claire, you're different. You don't belong there." I swallowed hard. I don't know where I belong anymore. Not after learning who my father was. Not after becoming someone people want to use. I feel like I'm just a shadow, living inside a life someone else planned for me. Daniel rose, walked back to me, and sat down beside me on the floor. The firelight caught on the faint scar near his temple one I hadn't noticed before. Gently, he took the cup from my hands, set it aside, and wrapped his fingers around mine. Claire, you're real. Your feelings are real. Every choice you make, whether it's right or wrong, belongs to you. Don't let your father's past or mine convince you otherwise. You're not a shadow. You're a person. I didn't realize I was crying until he squeezed my hand. Maybe it was the moment his fingers closed around mine. Maybe it was the first time in years someone told me I still belonged to myself. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and for the first time my breath came slow, not from fear, but from trust. In that moment, the cabin became the last remaining place where truth could live. Not the truth inside a stolen USB or in the classified files tied to my father, but the truth burning quietly in my chest, in Daniel's gaze, in the way his arm tightened around me as if he were holding on to something fragile and infinitely precious. We didn't need to say anything more. In that glow, truth required no words, only presence. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel alone. I remained seated beside Daniel, his hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze fixed on the weak, wavering fire, but the air around us grew heavier, as though every breath was being pulled into an invisible force that made it hard for me to breathe. He began explaining the plan, his voice steady and unbroken, outlining each step so I could picture it, yet every word struck me like a cold blade. Victor Constantine was gathering his forces, waiting for the slightest misstep to force us out of hiding. Daniel had calculated every route, every fallback, but I could see in his eyes that he knew no plan was ever perfect. Each step carried its own hidden risks. I listened as my heart twisted tighter. If anything went wrong, even by the smallest margin, Riley or I would pay with our lives. He described his team, how they would watch every exit, guard the rear, lay traps for anyone bold enough to approach. But when I asked about the other watchers, the invisible traps no one had detected yet, he simply shrugged, his expression shadowed. No one knew how they would move. And if anything happened, there was no guarantee of absolute safety. I couldn't respond. Daniel looked at me then, his face so serious it froze me in place. "I know what you're thinking," he murmured. "There is no happy ending here. No one walks away untouched. But we can lessen the damage." I let out a slow breath, feeling an invisible weight press down on my chest. "What about Riley?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She'll be all right," he said, though conviction didn't fully reach his eyes. "She won't be completely safe. I can't let her be part of the direct encounter. Marco will guard her, but the enemy could discover the hideout at any time." I nodded, trying to hold myself together, but the tears came anyway, rising faster than I could stop them. Everything was slipping beyond my control, and I was being dragged into a war I didn't fully understand. Daniel exhaled softly and tightened his hand around mine, as if transferring a fragment of his strength so I could face what was coming. "From here on," he said gently, "every decision must come from trust, not logic. Logic won't save us now," he went on, describing the route to the abandoned warehouse one Victor had used before, a place chosen for the exchange. In theory, it was neutral ground, but Victor was never simple. And Daniel wasn't naive enough to underestimate him. Each word painted pictures in my mind, shadowed corridors, blind corners hiding unseen dangers, and me as bait forced to appear, to act as if I had a choice when I was nothing more than a piece on someone else's board. Daniel explained I would wear a bulletproof vest and stay inside the car, watch everything but not step out, just enough visibility to keep the enemy from growing suspicious. Fear constricted my chest, each heartbeat like a warning that even the smallest mistake could cost a life. He emphasized that Victor would anticipate every predictable tactic, every standard trap, but Daniel had one unexpected move. Someone planted deep inside Victor's organization, for years had finally resurfaced, offering a sliver of advantage, our only real chance to flip the board. I listened, torn between a fragile sense of reassurance and an undercurrent of dread. Everything was calculated, and yet nothing was guaranteed. I sat still as tears streamed down my cheeks, while Daniel outlined each detail: approach routes, positioning of his men, timing of the contact, how to handle any unexpected intruders. I realized there would be no perfect ending, but at least there was a slim chance to survive, a chance that was fragile, but it was all we had. And in that quiet space by the fire, I looked at Daniel and saw more than a protector. I saw the only person strong enough to lead us through a storm wrapped in violence and shadows. I drew a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand anchoring me, and told myself that even without a good ending, we had no choice but to move forward. I stood in front of the small mirror in the bedroom of the cabin, the dim lamplight reflecting my tired, strained face, every detail laid bare. From the faint scar near my temple to the red swelling around my eyes from sleeplessness and fear. Daniel stood beside me, silent, lifting the bulletproof vest and placing it before Elibis, me as if handing me an invisible shield. I stared at it, heavy and rigid, realizing that once I wore it, I wasn't just protecting my body, I was stepping into a world I had never touched before. A world where every step and every decision might be one's last. The smell of new rubber and cold metal rose as I lifted it, my pulse racing as my mind conjured the possibilities ahead. Daniel leaned down, adjusting the straps on my shoulders with careful precision, his touch steady, deliberate, as if preparing a soldier for battle. In his eyes I saw complete focus, no fear, no hesitation. "You won't be hurt if we follow the plan," he said, enunciating each word, though we both knew nothing was absolute. I inhaled deeply, trying to absorb calm into my bones, even as tremors rippled through me. When I stepped out, Riley was sitting on the sofa, watching me with eyes filled with worry and something like pride. I forced a small smile, hoping it reassured her even though I wasn't sure I would ever be whole after tonight. Daniel led us to the SUV, his movements slow but commanding, his hand pressing lightly against my shoulder as if to remind me I wasn't alone. We plunged into the dense forest rain, cold droplets slashing against the windows, but I felt shielded, armed physically and mentally to face whatever waited ahead. On the road, Daniel explained how I should stay still in the car, how to brace myself when the road grew rough, when to duck, when to observe through the rearview mirror. Every detail came like a survival map, and I repeated each point silently, forcing myself to absorb them. The vest felt heavy, almost crushing against my ribs, yet it brought a strange sense of protection. Daniel placed his hand on mine once more, squeezing gently. "Remember," he said softly, "no one will touch you as long as I'm here." I nodded, my heartbeat still wild but fear slowly giving way to determination. We approached the road leading to the warehouse, the place Victor would be waiting. Daniel slowed the car, scanning the tree line, the shadows, every possible hiding place. Riley sat quietly in the back, arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes fixed on Daniel as if anchoring herself to his steadiness. A shiver crawled down my spine as I realized that once we stepped out of the SUV, nothing would be the same. We would no longer be ordinary people. We would be participants in a dangerous dance where one mistake could destroy us. Daniel turned to me, his gaze firm and layered with unspoken meaning. "Stay here. Watch. Do exactly what I tell you. No hesitation, no fear." I drew in a deep breath, feeling the vest pressed tightly around me like armor, not just shielding me, but awakening something fierce inside me. When we stepped out of the SUV, the darkness of the forest wrapped around us, but I no longer trembled. I moved with purpose, Riley close behind, and Daniel ahead of us, his eyes scanning every shadow, ready for whatever storm awaited. And I knew that tonight, none of us would emerge unchanged, but we were stepping into the battle armed, prepared, and with a resolve forged from everything we'd endured. The SUV turned down the dirt road leading to the old warehouse district where Victor had been waiting, the darkness pressing in from every direction, the damp air thick with the smell of engine oil and rotting wood, making my heartbeat hammer so violently it felt as if it might escape my chest. Daniel studied every footstep, every shifting shadow beneath the trees, mapping out cover points and potential threats before finally stopping the car, his sharp gaze sweeping over every corner like a predator measuring its territory. Riley and I sat in the back seat, strapped into bulletproof vests, our bodies rigid, our eyes fixed on Daniel as we tried to absorb every detail, every instruction, knowing that even the smallest mistake could erase our chances of surviving the night. Daniel opened the door, his hand squeezing my shoulder in a firm reminder, "Follow the exact route, do not deviate." We stepped out, our shoes sinking into the wet ground, the echo of footsteps on slick concrete ringing through the empty space like a warning. He guided us between stacks of abandoned crates, his eyes never still, his hands always ready, every muscle in his body coiled with controlled anticipation. Tension crawled through me, cold sweat collecting along my hairline despite the freezing air, and Riley walked close behind, glancing at me from time to time as if hoping to borrow strength from my presence. I squeezed her hand gently, giving her a reassurance I wasn't sure I truly had. When we reached the central section of the warehouse grounds, Daniel knelt, studying the ground with swift, precise movements, his eyes darting over tracks, scattered debris, and patches of shadow that an ordinary person would have overlooked. He leaned toward us and whispered, "They left signs." A chill rippled down my spine, the realization sinking in that Victor had set the stage long before we arrived. I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders like something physical, heavy and merciless. Daniel signaled us forward, and Riley and I followed the pattern we had rehearsed, every step measured, every breath controlled, our senses sharpened to the slightest sound. At the predetermined point, Daniel paused, crouched low, and made a subtle motion with his hand. 2 men hidden among the crates silently emerged into position. I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong it nearly lifted me off my feet, every muscle tightening, every nerve on fire as the warehouse transformed into a battleground waiting to erupt. A dark figure moved quickly from the far end of the warehouse, and Daniel's voice cut through the air. "Fire a warning shot. Do not let them reach us." Gunfire exploded, echoing through the cavernous dark, the smell of gunpowder rising thick and sharp. Riley screamed, and I pulled her, close, dragging her behind a crate as bullets cracked through the air. Daniel stood between us and the attackers, every motion, quick, controlled, lethal. His aim was precise, his timing impeccable, and in that moment, I felt both terrified and awe-struck by the sheer clarity with which he commanded chaos. The distance between us and Victor's men closed in with every second, each step forward a calculation on the edge of survival, each movement from Daniel a deliberate act meant to keep us alive. The vest pressed tightly against my body served not just as protection but as a reminder that every breath, every decision, now held weight, now mattered in a way I had never experienced before. The mix of sweat, gunpowder, shouts, and pounding heartbeats merged into a single frantic rhythm, a violent symphony choreographed by urgency and fear, yet Daniel seemed to move within it effortlessly, guiding us through the shadows and traps and the looming edge of death. I gripped Riley's hand, feeling her shaking even as she clung to me, both of us knowing that turning back was no longer an option. We had already stepped too far into the darkness to retreat. Gunshots thundered through the warehouse, the acrid smoke burning my eyes as I held Riley close, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own breath. Daniel stood ahead of us, his silhouette a dark, decisive shield, each movement sharpened by instinct and hardened experience. Riley whimpered, and I whispered that everything would be all right, though even I didn't believe it fully. Each blast of gunfire felt like a reminder of how thin the barrier was between life and the void waiting on the other side. I watched Daniel slip from one cover point to another, his steps clean and precise, his eyes scanning with terrifying accuracy, each flash of gunfire illuminating the hard lines of his face and the faint scars that spoke of battles long before tonight. Riley trembled beside me, clinging desperately to my arm, her whole body taut with fear as she tracked Daniel's movements like he was the only solid thing in the room. I forced myself to breathe, whispering Daniel's instructions in my mind, anchoring myself to them as the chaos swirled around us. A shadow lunged from the far corner and Daniel signaled sharply. Riley and I ducked low, and I watched him take the attacker down with swift, merciless precision. I didn't dare look at the bodies. My gaze stayed fixed on Daniel, drawn to the cold, focused calm that radiated from him like something untouchable. Smoke stung my eyes as I blinked, pulling Riley closer while trying to make sense of the chaos around us, every sound, every flicker of movement threatening to unravel whatever fragile hold we had on survival. Daniel motioned for us to move, and we followed him step by step, quick but cautious, edging closer to the back exit as gunfire burst again from a distance. Daniel instantly shifted, shielding us with his body as he crouched low. His gun aimed at the threat, his posture both protective and fierce, the slight crease in his brow revealing his worry for us even as he remained steady. Riley whispered my name, her voice barely a breath, and I held her tighter, silently promising myself that if it came to it, I would give anything to keep her alive. As the smoke thinned, its lingering scent coating my throat, Every movement from Daniel seemed touched by shadows, part man, part the ghosts of violence he had lived, through his instincts honed, his focus absolute. I saw the iron resolve in his eyes, the kind of strength forged through years of pain and survival, and felt both fear and a deep, inexorable pull toward that intensity. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself, feeling Riley's trembling and hearing the beat of my own pulse thudding in my ears, whispering the same truth into my mind. If we survive this night, nothing in my life will ever be the same. The final gunshots cracked through the air, and the smoke gradually cleared, revealing the brutal aftermath around us as Daniel lowered his weapon. We were still standing, still breathing, but I knew the ghosts of this moment would follow me forever, etched into memory, a reminder that life had never been guaranteed, and that Daniel, standing between us in the darkness with unwavering resolve, had changed everything in my world simply by being there. When the last wisps of smoke thinned inside the old warehouse, the air grew so still I could hear my own breath and the frantic pounding in my chest. Riley still clinging to me, her eyes wide and glossy with fear, scanning the space as if the shadows themselves might lunge again. And I could smell the acrid trace of gunpowder mixed with sweat and the damp chill that drifted along the concrete, a reminder that what we had just survived was no dream, but a living, breathing piece of terror. Daniel stood in the center of the warehouse, his body slightly bent, his eyes still sharp, the gun still hot in his grip. Yet when he looked toward us, there was a flicker of quiet relief, as if he had just waged a battle that demanded not only skill but calculation, composure, and an unwavering will. I glanced around, seeing his men checking the perimeter to ensure no lingering threat, and every silhouette, every shifting shadow still carried the echo of what had just happened. I let out a trembling breath, overwhelmed by fear and gratitude that Riley was unharmed, that she was still here with me. Daniel approached, his voice low but softened from the tension that had shaped every second before. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded, trying to steady myself despite the tremor still running through me. Riley let out a quiet sob, and I stroked her hair, whispering that it was over, that we were alive, that we had been given another chance to face whatever would come next. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just the temporary end of danger, but a pause, a breath between storms, a moment to grasp the truth. Every decision, every movement, every shot fired, every gesture from Daniel had kept us alive. When we stepped outside into the muted night, the distant city lights shimmered through the thin drizzle, and the world looked unfamiliar, trembling with aftershocks, as if we had walked through a doorway into another existence where life and death brushed against each other like passing strangers. Daniel guided us to the waiting SUV, still scanning the darkness before opening the door and helping us inside. And there was something different in his eyes now, something gentler, a quiet care that unfurled in the aftermath of violence. Inside the car, Riley leaned against me, her hands still trembling, and I held her tight, feeling the fragile safety of that moment. Daniel drove us away, the headlights cutting through the mist, and I could feel the pulse of the city returning, yet my nerves were still pulled taut, unable to forget the gunshots, the smoke, the terrifying closeness of death. I looked at Daniel. He didn't speak, but his eyes told me the truth. The battle wasn't over. Victor's remaining men would not disappear, and we needed to brace ourselves for what was coming. But at least we were alive. At least we had the precious, fragile space to breathe. What we had survived had changed something inside me, not only in my connection to Daniel, but in my understanding of myself, my fear, my courage, and the hidden edges of my strength. Even as danger circled us like a phantom, I realized I had learned to stand, to face what once would have crushed me, to trust the one person who had walked into the fire with us. As the car sped down the empty road, Riley drifted asleep on my shoulder, and I felt Daniel's hand reach over to gently clasp mine, a quiet reminder that we were still here, still alive, and that whatever lay ahead might be ruthless. But nothing could take away the survival we had just earned through sweat, fear, and the fierce resolve he had poured into every second. I exhaled slowly, watching the flickering streetlights through the window, knowing we had outrun one nightmare, but the darkness was not gone, not yet, and something deep inside me had shifted permanently. The night etched into memory as proof of how fragile life could be and how fierce it could become when held in trembling, determined hands. The SUV turned off the dirt road as the faint glow of the city receded. Riley still pressed against me with her eyes shut, and her body trembling from what she had endured, and I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine, grounding me amid the storm still reverberating inside. He stared ahead, his voice steady and low. "You need to know nothing can touch you while I'm here." His words soothed and warned in the same breath, and I swallowed my fear, forcing myself to listen, to brace for whatever he would say next. When we arrived at the temporary safe house, a sleek, modern building, tucked discreetly into the landscape, Daniel led us inside, checking every angle before unlocking the door, his gaze sweeping the corners with the precision of someone who understood danger more intimately than anyone I'd ever known. He guided us to the living room, told us to sit, and stayed standing with his attention fixed on us, his voice firm. "I'm going to tell you everything, but you need to listen carefully. Every word matters." I nodded, my heart thudding as if trying to match the cadence of his breath. Realizing that nothing about life as I had known it remained, Daniel began to unravel the truth. Victor's scheme, the threat closing in on Riley and me, the information hidden on the thumb drive I had stumbled upon, and each detail was delivered with chilling precision. I listened, entranced and frightened, the layers of the conspiracy widening with every sentence, the reality settling over me that the life I once knew was out of reach forever. Riley listened too, tense and wide-eyed, as if every muscle in her body was coiled for impact. I understood then that we had stepped into Daniel's world, a place where every decision was strategy, every movement survival, every breath measured. He continued, explaining the plan to exchange a counterfeit thumb drive, how his men would control each angle, how he had predicted Victor's every possible move, and yet kept a sliver of unpredictability hidden to counter any foresight Victor might have. As he spoke, his eyes paused on mine, and there was a meaning inside that gaze, not just protection, but an invitation, a pull toward the dark, commanding world he lived in, a world of risk and dominance where everything was both perilous and tightly controlled. I felt the strange, trembling flutter inside me, fear, curiosity, something more unsettling. The realization that Daniel wasn't just saving us, he was becoming the center of every choice I had left. He reached for my hand, held it firmly, and told me I could stand beside him protected, but exposed to danger, or walk away and attempt to reclaim a life that would no longer be safe. My throat tightened, the weight of the decision pressing into my chest, because this wasn't about survival alone. It was about trust, about surrendering to a truth that frightened me as much as it grounded me. I looked at Riley. She gave me a small, shaky smile, reminding me that we were not alone. Then I turned back to Daniel, my voice trembling but steady with conviction. "I'll stay with you," I said, "but I need clarity. I need to know I still have a choice, that I still have control over my life." Daniel's smile was soft yet edged with power, his eyes warm but unwavering. He nodded, an unspoken vow settling between us like a promise sealed in quiet fire, and I felt the shift inside me, the beginning of a path neither safe nor simple, but one we would face together, under Daniel's unbreakable protection and the fragile, fierce courage that survival had carved into us tonight. The morning light streamed softly through the wide windows of the safe house, falling across Riley as she slept beside me, her face still carrying the faint exhaustion of a night carved out of chaos. And I sat close by, sipping warm coffee, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, realizing that everything we had just endured wasn't merely a chain of dangerous events, but a precious lesson in the value of life, in courage, and in the fragile but powerful trust we place in one another. What began as a mischievous message, a reckless step, had opened a path threaded with fear and resolve, teaching me that sometimes in life we cannot predict the outcome. Yet it is our bravery in facing the consequences, our clarity of mind, and our connection to those around us that become the strength guiding us through any storm. Daniel, with all his power and the danger that shadowed him, had chosen to protect us, chosen to lead us through the threat, and I learned that kindness and protection are not merely about physical strength or resources. They are commitments, responsibilities, a humanity that survives even in a world seemingly ruled by violence and self-interest. Looking at Riley, I understood how fortunate we were, but also that our survival was not a matter of luck alone. It was the result of caution, courage, and the willingness to make the right choices in the very moments when fear tries to swallow us whole. Everything I experienced taught me to treasure every breath of peace, to cherish safety my own and that of those I love, and reminded me that life is rarely perfect, rarely fair. But what truly defines us is how we stand in the face of it, how we hold on to compassion and bravery when the world feels unforgiving. I realize that some stories in life aren't only meant to be told, but to be learned from, reshaped, remembered, so that when we look back, we can see the strength that lived inside us, the meaning of friendship, humanity, and sacrifice, the truth that even in our most dangerous hours, we still have the power to choose right, to choose goodness, and to choose to live with responsibility. If this story touches your heart, as it has touched mine, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you might have done in her place, which feelings resonated most with you, and what lessons you carry into your own life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next emotional, meaningful story. And please like and share this video so that more people can feel, learn, and reflect on the humanity woven into experiences that may unfold on a screen, but echo deeply within real life. The story of Claire, Riley, and Daniel ends here, but the message of courage, responsibility, and mutual care continues to linger in each of us, reminding us that some stories are rewritten, not just for entertainment, but to help us see ourselves more clearly, appreciate the present, and face the future with open eyes. Thank you for listening, sharing, and walking with us through this journey of emotion, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video with new stories, new trials, and even deeper lessons drawn from life.